Tales from the motherland. Tales from the motherland.
So, the New World Order is upon us, and for those who don't understand history, it's time for you to reflect on what really happened in the Cold War period. We now have the second phase of the Cold War. I'm not going to waste the time. Let's talk about the story for the day. Things are heating up in the colonies of France. We're talking about Mali having a coup and removing French as its official language. Burkina Faso also having a coup, and now Niger. But for those who don't know, Niger is a unitary state bordered by Libya to the northeast, Chad to the southeast, to the east, Nigeria to the south, Benin, Burkina Faso to the southwest, Mali to the west, Algeria to the northwest, and it has a population of around 25 million people. We need to understand that it's highly dominated by the Muslim community. So like I said, it had a coup on the 26th of July. However, after the coup, we saw countries like Mali and Burkina Faso who stepped in to defend the coup. But because they are also products of a coup, definitely it is a movement of defiance against France. But Guinea also became part of those who tried Burkina Faso. And Mali even said,
Le gouvernement de transition du Burkina Faso et du Mali avertissent que toute intervention militaire contre le Niger s'assimilerait à une déclaration de guerre contre le Burkina Faso et le Mali. Je répète. 4. Avertissent que toute intervention militaire contre le Niger s'assimilerait à une déclaration de guerre contre le Burkina Faso et le Mali.
But with all that support, we also have some countries in and out of Africa who vehemently oppose the development.
In the event the authorities' demands are not met within 1 week, take all measures necessary to restore constitutional order in the Republic of Niger. Such measures may include the use of force. To this effect, the chiefs of defense staff of ECOWAS are to meet immediately.
Development. On a lighter note, it is a clear opposition to Western influence. Anyways, spread the words, guys. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and drop a comment so we can get more people on board. So it's hard to understand the impact of what's going on in Niger without looking at the historic part of what became Niger, and also to look at the collective, which means the countries that are within the catchment area or within the Sahel region, which occupies the Niger as the bulwark. So you see, in the words of the former president of France, called Francois Mitterrand in 1957. He said that France needs Africa to stay a major power. And also the words of Jacques Chirac in 2008. He also said France has no history without Africa. France will never be a country without Africa. A first world country. I'm pretty sure that's what he said. But something like that. So we realized the fact that Niger is becoming more independent and it's moving toward African unity. Because the fashion of the day these days is that Africa is uniting. Whether we like it or not, it's something that is coming at a rapid pace, but people don't realize how much is coming. But it's on the way. If we need to understand where the problems within the Sahel regions or the Francophone regions, there is a man called de Gaulle. So de Gaulle proposed in December 1940 a pact that was called the French Colonial Pact, which was a deal between France and its ex-African colonies, which aimed to define post-independence ties and to ensure that France still has or exerted influence upon these Francophone countries or African countries per se. So this pact was formed during the Cold War, when Western nations were struggling to keep the control over nations. They chose a path to stay away from France. So most countries that were run by those who spoke French in Africa wanted to gain total independence from France. So, 1958, Sekou Touré of Guinea chose freedom over French colonial empire. The elites in Paris were so mad and retaliated by destroying anything in Guinea that symbolizes the benefits of French colonization. So you can imagine there is someone who has the audacity to tell us that there was an advantage of colonialism. No, it's okay. It's a matter of debate, People can debate and ask ourselves what really was the gains of colonialism. Many people might come and defend and say, you know what, we had buildings, we had this, but these things existed in the African context. As long as people had their own identity to safeguard and preserve, they could develop the country to get to this level of the world. This is like a man who gets into your house and then he rapes and he murders your wife and kids. Then you finally want him out. He says, I will destroy the house extension or the conservatory that I have put on the house because you guys had benefit of me extending the conservatory of the house. So I'm going to destroy the house even because you guys benefited a lot from me. Therefore, you should pay me. So after doing this, Sekou Touré faced a lot of resistance from Paris. 3,000 French people, investors left the country, taking all the properties, destroying anything which could not be moved, which means schools, nurseries, public administration buildings were crumbled. Cars, books, almost everything that represents the development of a country. We're talking about tractors, crushed, sabotaged, horses, cows, even poisoned at a certain point in time. So we need to understand how this history shapes what's happening in Niger now. So France's bold move sent shockwaves through the colonies, capping off with fear and worry amongst African leaders. After this, no one dared to defy France like Sekou Touré had. So it was a lesson forever remembered. And in the words of Touré, he said, we prefer freedom in poverty to opulence in slavery. So he declared freedom was more important than wealth and power. But sadly, his words didn't shape the minds of those who followed because they had even a far greater evil than what he had. So we move to another leader who defied the French government and met his maker, Sylvanus Olympio, the first president of the Republic of Togo, a tiny country in West Africa. So Olympio found a middle ground solution with the French. He didn't want the country to continue to be a French dominion. Therefore, he refused to sign the colonization continuation pact. So de Gaulle had proposed this, but he agreed rather to pay the annual debts to France for the so-called benefits Togo got from French colonization. So remember that all African countries were afraid to chase France because they would lose the certain benefits of colonization, what they called the colonial tax, which resulted in France spiking the reimbursement of the so-called colonial debt close to 40% of the country's budget in 1963. So we see Togo's president who then said, you know what, it doesn't make sense for me to pay 40% of my country's budget to France. Therefore, I'm being shortchanged by paying 40% of my annual budget to satisfy the French. Therefore, you know what he did? He then said, I am going to dump the CFA, or which is the currency that is imposed up to now. It's still imposed on African nations and is controlled in Paris. So the CFA is the currency that is used by these states, the African states. It's more like francs of an African nature. So funny. But anyway, so it's like this, they call them the independent states in West Africa, which make up the West Economic Monetary Union, which is UEMOA. So it's called Union Economic et Monetaire West Africaine. Now, my French is bad, but you should understand that we have Benin, we have Burkina Faso, we have Mali, we have Niger, we have Senegal, and Togo, which use this currency. So you realize how France is furious about the new developments in Niger. This was one of defiances that came through. I see a lot of people thinking that Western African countries are just annexed, they're just looked down upon without any resistance. They resisted the system, But all those who resisted met their maker. All those who resisted got into this position that I'm talking about. Another defiance that he did, Olympio, he then went on to print his own currency. So on January 13, 1963, he had only 3 days after starting to print his country's own currency. A squad of illiterate soldiers backed by France killed the first elected president of the newly independent Togo. So Olympio was killed by Etienne Nasibe, who, according to some sources, he only received $612 for the hitman job. So you see, a president of a country that was supposed to stand up for the people was killed for $612 equivalent money. So on June 30, 1962, we also have Modibo Keita, the first president of the Republic of Mali, who decided to withdraw from French colonial currency, FCFA, which was imposed on these 12 newly independent African countries. You know, for the Malian president, who was leaning more to a socialist economy, it was clear that colonization continuation pact with France was a trap and a burden for the country. So he then said on November 19, like Olympio, 1968, he was a victim of a coup that was carried out by another ex-French foreign legionnaire, Lieutenant Moussa Traoré. So in fact, during the turbulent period of African countries fighting to liberate themselves from European colonization, France would repeatedly use many ex-foreign legionnaires to carry out coups against elected presidents. So now we see how the coup in Niger is becoming topical. But this has been a history in West Africa. All countries are facing coups one after the other, and it has become acculturated by the system. So you see, political transition of power is a culture. Countries that have coups will always have coups in the next coming 20 years or 30 years to come. It's like a disease. The more you bring in a culture, it's like France, for example. I can give you France. France, since the French Revolution, all protests that happen in France are deadly. They are bad because of a culture of a certain act. So, like how Niger and the rest of the countries in Mali and Togo have had these coups, it is the normal transition of power within the spectrum of politics. So now we have coups after coups. It's a culture, but who brought it? The same people who are now crying over a coup that happened to them. The same people who brought the culture of coups. So, to continue, on January 1st, 1966, Jean Bedel Bokassa, an ex-French legionnaire, carried a coup against David Dacko, the first president of Central African Republic. See? On January 3, 1966, again, Maurice Yamogo, the first president of the Republic of Upper Volta, by then, now it's called Burkina Faso, but was a victim carried out by Abubakar Sanglo Labizana. And he was also an ex-French legionnaire who was fighting the French troops in Indonesia and in Algeria. On 26 October again, 1972, Matthew Kerekou was the security guard to President Hubert Maga, the first president of the Republic of Benin. He carried a coup against president after he attended school from 1968 to 1970. You see, Mohamed Bazoum was removed by his own security guard. Let that sink. So history has a way of coming back to bite the one who starts it. This is a matter of political culture that is infused by a bit of colonization. And when those two are happening, and the new world order that is coming with Russia in play. But hold on, I'm yet to bring in how Russia represents this. So the question is, why would a person who is very presidential, who is very loved by people, be removed and people celebrate? Well, he's called a puppet. So, according to facts, President Bazoum was the first elected leader to succeed another in Niger since independence in 1960. So, it means that he has been suspended from a legitimate position. But the question is, how legitimate is the legitimacy of his presidency? How legitimate is he? That's the question. So now we have General Abdamane Chiani, the head of state, and also heading the military junta of the country. So, to understand why this is echoing more concerns, especially to the West, we should understand why Niger is very important. So, Niger, like I said, is in a region of Sahel, a belt of land that stretches from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea, and the area has a lot of in-house fight, usually of a jihadist nature. So, the area is plagued by a lot of military regimes. Western nations also were looking at Niger as a bulwark against further disorder and spreading of Russian influence. So if we see this, if you are smart enough, you can tell me that this is not a Niger problem. This is not a Mali problem. This is not a Nigerian. This is not a Burkina Faso problem. This is a new world order that's coming to the world. If you're not blind, you should see that we are heading toward a certain narrative. And the narrative is that Russia is destabilizing countries that benefit a lot from Africa. And how is it doing that? A few weeks ago, we had the Russia-Africa Summit, and we had Mali publicly proclaiming that it will defend Niger at all costs, and Putin was impressed. And now we see that in Niger, the coup that's happening in Western Africa, it's a bellwether state in many ways. It had seen an example of relative democratic stability in recent years, and that is a strategy to destabilize and fight war on two fronts. Now you see, France has been involved in the Ukrainian war and has been supportive of Ukraine, and now Putin has planned another one. And like I said when I started this, I said the former president said without Africa, France will slide down to a third world country. And which country would you attack if you want to destabilize France? Definitely you would attack the bellwether state of Western Africa, Niger. But before you attack Niger, you need to look around it. The countries, for a landlocked country, you need to attack the countries that are surrounding Niger. Mali, Burkina Faso, what's next? So the US State Department described Niger as important as a linchpin of stability in the Sahel and a reliable counter-terrorism partner. So you see now, when I tell you this, Niger houses Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, and it's rich in uranium. Guess who was benefiting from uranium? 7% of global supplies of uranium come from Niger. So let me ask you a question. Why do we have Niger as a crisis, and it's the most important topical issue right now in the West? It's because it holds a strategic position, and as these issues loom, we have to question ourselves. Why was Mali overlooked? Why was Burkina Faso overlooked? These are some of the questions that we have to ask. How did we get here? So the Sahel region has always had turbulent issues, I understand. So amongst all this, we should then look at the men who went against Putin himself, who actually has an army on the ground in Niger. The leader of Russia's Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who has reportedly described it as a triumph. So he is saying this is independence of Niger with their colonizers. The biggest question is, how is this linked to this whole Ukraine and the New World Order? Pause a minute. I want you to tell me something. If you are to destabilize a European country that you know solely depends on an African country, which European country would you use? Would you go for any other European country, or would you go to the USA, or would you go to anyone? You would go to France. Why? Because France has always had a history when it comes to colonization, and it has never left the colonial system. So now do we understand where we're going? And now as we go into the next phase, you might realize that they will never leave this unhandled. And this is going to be another war that leaves its territory and goes to the next one. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, and if you enjoyed this one, please, why not join the team and let's grow together? We need to hit 1,000 subscribers soon. So join in, let's have more discussions and eye-opening sessions. Till next time, love you.